Hello, I'm doing a movie review, and the movie I want to review is Watership Down. Now, Watership Down is a 1978 animated film written and directed by Martin Rosen, and the film is based on the 1972 novel of the same name by Richard Adams. Now, I've never read the book, but this is honestly one of my favorite animated films. Now, I have the Criterion DVD of Watership Down, but I also have the movie on VHS. I had this VHS copy of the movie since I was a little kid, and unfortunately I lost the case for this a long time ago. Now, this was sort of a passion project for Rosen, who was a huge fan of the book, and he purchased the film rights, and he was going to serve as the film's producer with John Hubley, who worked for Disney, directing, and Hubley did direct the opening sequence of the film, however he went uncredited. But John Hubley left the project due to creative differences, and Rosen took over directing. Now, Martin Rosen admitted that he didn't know crap about animation, but obviously the animation team that he put together knew what they were doing, because I actually think the animation in this film is quite beautiful. And he would go on to direct another Richard Adams adaptation in 1982 called The Plague Dogs. Now, Watership Down has been called a children's film, and it really isn't, at least not in my opinion. Now, I'm not saying you should keep your kids away from this film by any means, but this movie is definitely meant for more of a mature audience. And there are some scenes in this film, and there is some imagery in the film that I think would definitely freak a little kid out, because there's one particular scene in this movie that freaking haunted me as a child. That being said, I also think people have grossly over-exaggerated how violent the film is. Like, some people have tried to make it out like it's an animated horror film, like something like Fairleigh, and it's not that bad. Now, when this was released in the UK, it was rated U, which I think is the British censor's equivalent to what would be G ratings here in the States. However, here in the States, the movie was rated PG, which I think is probably the more appropriate rating for this movie. I mean, then again, England and America probably have different standards for what's appropriate for children. But again, I really don't consider this to be a children's film. At the same time, however, I've always maintained that stuff made for children should be darker. I mean, I do think children can handle a lot more than we as adults give them credit for. At the same time, however, depending on how old your child is, I personally recommend if you're gonna let your kid watch this, you should watch it with them or watch it beforehand to see if it's suitable for your child. And I'm sure if there's any actual parents watching this video, they probably don't need me to tell them that. Now, the plot of Watership Down is it follows these rabbits from this warren. You start off following these two brothers named Hazel and Fiver has sort of a premonition that something catastrophic is going to happen to their warren. It turns out that Fiver has had these kinds of visions before and has been right before, and they try to tell people about this like the chief, but the chief kind of just brushes this off like they're lunatics. But they do manage to get a few other rabbits to join them as they leave the warren, including the warren's former police chief, Bigwig. So Hazel, Fiver, Bigwig, and the other rabbits go on a journey looking for a new warren for themselves, and along the way they're trying to dodge their species' natural predators. Eventually, they find out, to their horror, that Fiver's prophecy came true. It turns out that the land that their original warren was on was marked by humans for residential development. Eventually in the movie, they come across another warren that is basically run like a totalitarian dictatorship, and it's run by this evil rabbit named General Woundwort. And that's really all I want to say about the plotline of Watership Down. But Watership Down is an excellent movie. I'll admit, as a little kid, I didn't understand a lot of the subtext of this film, but this is a lot more mature than you might be expecting for an animated film about anthropomorphic rabbits. My only issue with this film, now I've never read the book, but there are some scenes in this movie where I could tell this was probably a lot more detailed in the book. But that's any adaptation, really. But this is really a compelling human drama, which might seem weird considering that none of the characters we follow are actually humans. You still care about these characters just as much as you would a human character. This is really a drama about survival and hope. And the voice acting in the movie is excellent. You have John Hurt, one of my favorite actors, playing the voice of Hazel. You have Richard Briers as the voice of Fiver. Michael Graham Cox as the voice of Bigwig. You have Harry Andrews as the voice of General Woundwort, who is a fantastic and terrifying villain. But a character who really kind of stole this movie is, there's a seagull in the film who starts helping the main characters. And he was played by American actor and comedian Zero Mostel. But this character was absolutely hilarious. Mostel actually died over a year before the movie was released. Also, there's a minor character in the movie named Pipkin, who is played by the voice of Roy Kinnear, who most people might recognize as Veruca Salt's dad from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Now, as I said in the beginning of this video, I do think people have over-exaggerated how violent this movie is, but the movie certainly is violent, especially towards the end, with the final battle between Woundwort and Bigwig. And there is a decent amount of gore at the end of the film, which might be shocking for a little kid. And there is one scene in this movie which, as I said, haunted me when I was a little kid. There's a scene in this movie where they come across the survivor of what happened to their old warren. And he recounts what happened, and just the imagery in this scene, like, if rabbits go to hell, this is what I would imagine rabbit hell to look like. But just the image of these rabbits desperately crawling through these tunnels and dying was imprinted on my brain from a very early age. Now, there is a lot of subtext in this movie which probably comes from the book, like Woundwort's Warren. There's a lot of parallels you could draw with, like, Nazi Germany. But you could really draw a parallel between Woundwort's Warren and really any authoritarian dictatorship that has existed in the human world. And the whole thing of using animals to reflect human political issues, you could very much compare this movie and the book to something like George Orwell's Animal Farm, or Art Spiegelman's Mouse. There are also some definite environmental issues brought up in the film, like industrialization and what industrialization is doing to the environment. And there are some religious allegories in the film, like in the beginning of the movie you realize that the rabbits believe that the world was created by a god called Frith. And you realize that the rabbits believe that the reason they have so many natural predators is because, in the beginning of time, the rabbits were such an arrogant race, and this is sort of Frith's punishment on them. And you could draw a parallel between that and, like, man's fall from grace, like Adam and Eve being outcasts from the Garden of Eden, or you could even draw a parallel between that and, like, Lucifer's fall from grace, Lucifer being cast out of heaven because of his pride and arrogance. The rabbits also believe in something called the Black Rabbit, which is essentially their version of the Grim Reaper. So again, the film has a lot of political and environmental and religious allegories. And I also gotta say, the music in this film is beautiful. And I'm not just talking about the Art Garfunkel song Bright Eyes, which appears on the soundtrack for this. That's a great song, and the sequence that it appears in is a beautiful sequence, but I'm just talking about the score in general. Now, if you are a fan of this film, I highly recommend picking up the Criterion DVD or Blu-ray. And this has some really cool special features, including some making-of features, and an interview with Guillermo del Toro, and Guillermo del Toro actually has some really insightful things to say about this movie. And aside from all the violence in the film, this is really a beautiful film about hope. Now, there were other adaptations of the Richard Adams novel. There was a Watership Down TV series. I've never seen it, but apparently it is a little more kid-friendly, like it's a little more geared towards children, and they definitely downplayed the more violent aspects of the story. And then in 2018, there was a BBC miniseries adaptation of the novel, which was done with CGI animation. I've never seen that miniseries, but I'm assuming it being a miniseries, it probably is a little closer to the book than this is. But yeah, that was my review on Watership Down, and bye.